Welcome, everyone, to Farm Aid Breaking Bread series. I'm Caitlin Arnold Stefano. I'm the Hotline Program Manager at Farm Aid. Today, we're going to be seeing a new documentary called Out of the Shadows, which is focused on farmer mental health and specifically in rural areas. And then we have a couple of speakers to share with you as well. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I just wanted to kick it off, briefly just talk about the Farm Aid Hotline and talk a little bit about my own personal story with farmer mental health and farmer suicide. So the Farm Aid Hotline has been around as long as Farm Aid, since 1985. This is our 40th anniversary year. And we started as actually a line where folks could call and donate money to farmers that wanted to help farmers out. But then we started to get calls from farmers themselves in crisis. And we've kept the hotline going all these years. We now have an incredible team of hotline operators that actually answer the phone when farmers call. We are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern. And you can call us and actually talk to one of us on the phone. And it's a small team, small but mighty. We bring a lot of different perspectives and experiences. We're all connected with agriculture. So we still talk to lots of farmers every day. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and one I feel very passionate about, and one I feel it's important to talk about as much as possible, to get it out of the shadows, if you will. Aptly named film. I am a former farmer. My grandpa was a cherry and apple farmer out in Washington State, and then it skipped a generation. I grew up in the city, but then I decided to become a farmer after college, which my grandpa was not happy about. But he came around. He was supportive eventually. I farmed vegetables and flowers, small scale, farmers market, CSA for 12 years. And it was really hard. It was really tough. It's really tough to be a farmer in the US today. Um, Especially, I think, a young farmer who, I didn't have generational land or wealth going into it. And that farming knowledge had skipped a generation, so had to sort of learn from scratch. But I stuck with it for a long time. Eventually, had to make the difficult decision to stop farming because of lack of access to land and lack of access to capital. And that's how I got involved in the nonprofit side of farming. I went to work for National Young Farmers Coalition doing farmer organizing. And about 1 month after I started and left my community of tight-knit farmers out in Washington State, one of my very close farmer friends committed suicide. That was in May 2017. So I just moved across the country and started a new job. I was totally removed from my community, and it hit me really hard. It was not expected, and it obviously none of us, had seen the signs. And we spent a long time wondering what we could have done differently for our friend. So after that, I got really focused on farmer mental health, and I was in the nonprofit space, so I was able to devote more time and energy to it than when I was farming. So I began to try to get the stories out there, try to get farmers to share their stories and talk with one another through the farmer organizing that I was doing. Then I began working on my thesis for my master's program focused on farmer mental health. And I actually interviewed the Farm Aid hotline operator at the time about their work. And I decided I want to go work for Farm Aid. That's where I want to work next. I want to work on the hotline. And now here I am. So it kind of came full circle for me. And now I'm able to support the hotline team in the good and difficult work that they're doing, talking to farmers every day, about whatever situation they find themselves in. So I just want to welcome all of you and thank you for taking time to be with us today. I hope you find the film helpful or at least resonates with you in some way. So I'm gonna show the film. It's about 20 minutes long, and then we're gonna go over to our panel of guest speakers, hear from them, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A.
Farmers in the crisis in rural America, no one knew about because no one wanted to talk about it.
Suicide rates in rural areas are double what they are in urban areas, and that's just unacceptable. We lose, I would say, young males to suicide. I've counted 5 in the last year and a half.
These are the people who are taking care of us. If there's a problem there and we see a decline in mental health services that could lead to suicides, those people are gone and they can't take care of us.
There's just a lot of stress that people who don't live in rural America realize, and it may have a huge impact on the mental health of a farmer.
Farmers are very proud people. They're the eternal optimists. Boy, when it breaks, it breaks.
My concern is lack of access for help. It's a big issue.
And I'm hoping it's going to change, but I've been hoping that for 20 years.
Where are the professionals that can understand what people in rural areas are going through to where it doesn't lead to the extreme measures?
When a farmer's on a tractor, they're there all alone. You start wondering about, how am I going to buy shoes for my kids to go to school? How am I going to make sure my family's fed and taken care of? And when you're all alone and you're sitting on that and you've got all these darts coming at you, they can turn into demons.
I'd buried enough friends that, never saw the signs. I can remember my own time working up to my own suicide attempt. Nobody listened.
He was going to be home alone on the farm, and he just dropped to his knees in the hallway of our house and said, "I don't want to live anymore." My purpose in sharing my experience is to just save even one family from going through what we went through. My name is Amber Dykeshorn-Luke, and we are in Geddes, South Dakota. It is a rural community, strong in agriculture. There's a lot of smaller towns around here, and pretty much everybody knows everybody. I grew up in an agriculture community. My dad was a mechanic on our farm, and he also had cattle. Been around it since the beginning of my marriage with Chris. At the beginning of our marriage, he worked in Platte, South Dakota at Myring Farm Service, and then we actually moved to the Dykeshorn family farm in February of 2017. Chris had been talking to me about wanting to go to full-time farming, and I was very resistant just because the financial situation with farming was not consistent, so there was a lot of reservation for me to want to go all in. When we took over, it was overwhelming. There was a lot of responsibility living on the farm, caring for the animals, things like that, and it was very different financially. I don't know how to describe it. We just didn't have the security that we had before. When Chris was really struggling with things, he was very quiet and distant. It affected our family in many different ways. The kids had less time with Dad. The kids saw Dad crying at different times. Yeah. I remember that morning, Chris got up and went to the bathroom, and he came back to our bed, and he laid at the foot of the bed, and he held my feet, and he got up and went out to the porch, and I heard him in the porch just thinking he was getting dressed. He was actually opening up his gun safe, grabbing his deer rifle, and I heard him leave, and I want to say it was probably around 7:10 in the morning, and my phone was ringing, and it said Sam Mutter, which was my father-in-law's renter who lived on that North Farm place. And I answered it, and he said, "Oh, Amber, I'm so sorry. Chris shot himself." And I said, "I'm on my way over." It was a sight that I will never forget, but seeing him there, so helpless and so broken. And the hardest thing I ever have done in my life was when I had to go back home and wait for my kids to get back home to tell them that their dad was not coming back home again.
My name is Jamie Viramontes,
I'm Cole Viramontes.
and we farm in Deming, New Mexico.
My grandpa started the farm in the 50s. My dad took over in the 80s. He did a heck of a job, and now I'm slowly taking over. There's a lot of pressure to continue the name and to have something for the kids to take over, especially when the previous generations laid the foundation and just did an incredible job, and they're really big shoes to fill. I had a really good friend, and there were signs. Sorry, I'm trying to think about how to say this. There was some signs that he was unwell, but he was a man with strong faith, and everybody used to say, we got it. It's another year. We'll get through it. And he ended up taking his life, and it was a shock to a lot of us. You don't really know if maybe you could have said something different, or maybe he could have asked different questions to let anybody know what he was really feeling. And I just wonder about that sometimes.
My name is Jeff Ditzenberger. I'm the founder, president, and chairman of the board for TUGS. I've been in Monroe most of my life. It's the hub of everything kind of local here. I have a ton of in-life experience and just really relate to a lot of things that especially men, veterans, and farmers go through because I'm all three of those. When I got back from the Gulf and out of the service, we had moved to a farm, which was, the house was part of my wages. I was kind of having some struggles with some PTSD and some other stuff that was going on. Took forever to get in to see somebody, and that was back in early 90s. I gave away prized possessions to family members and friends, basically kind of said my last goodbyes. Nobody picked up on anything, and wrote my note. The next night, I lit an old abandoned house on fire, and that's how I was going to end my life. And then for whatever reason, I was kind of like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Called 911. We put the fire out. However, when I went to court, I never told anybody that I had tried to kill myself, because God, who wants that stigma? Who wants that? It was easier and less stigma for me and less embarrassing to be a veteran, volunteer firefighter, and get charged with arson and do 9 months in jail and 5 years probation and $10,000 fine than it was for me to admit that I had tried to die by suicide. Years go by, buried a couple of friends from suicide, still didn't talk about it. And I finally thought, you know what? There's got to be something that we can do that changes the tide of this. So TUGS stands for Talking, Understanding, Growing, and Supporting, because even big ships need little ships sometimes. And I'm a Navy guy. I did 4 years in the Navy, and that's where I came up with the name. The TUGS mission is to get rid of a lot of the stigmas around mental health. I think, honestly, we would all be hard pressed to not say that we, at one point in time had depression or, had bad days and that kind of stuff. And we want to normalize that. That's one of the core missions of TUGS. How are things on the farm? What's going on in the industry?
Our expenses of doing business have just skyrocketed, so it's tough.
Your mental gets to a point, you're almost telling yourself, God, we used to make this amount of money per gallon of milk. Am I not, milking the cows good enough? Are we not trying hard enough? So you try harder and it gets harder. Mentally, it really weighs on you big time.
What's that do for stress? Like, how do you guys, where's your stress level at?
Oh, it's low.
Sarcasm is still great, Liz.
No, stress follows us everywhere. I mean, you can't even sleep at night most nights because you're just so worried about how you're going to keep it all going.
I'm Rachel Clues, and I am the Family and Consumer Science Specialist with K-State Research and Extension, and I cover the Southwest region of Kansas. One of the biggest things that's different for our agriculture community, they have very unique stressors that most other careers or jobs wouldn't have. Higher prices for operating, equipment cost and repairs, and then lower market prices. Even sometimes succession planning and family issues. So those are things that, I think most jobs might have a couple of stressors, but for our agricultural community, it's a compound of all of those.
My name is Greg Merck. I'm the Executive Director of New York Farmet, and we are presently located in the Hudson Valley region of New York State. Farming is extremely stressful for a variety of reasons. The most common factors that come to mind to people are obviously weather, price, cost of inputs, challenges most other small businesses also deal with. But from a farmer's perspective, many of these situations are completely out of their control. Farmers do not determine what they're going to sell their product for, unlike most other manufacturers. Best way to understand it if you're not a farmer is imagine you go to work for 40 hours, but you don't know what your boss is going to pay you until payday. But you're expected to put in 40 hours, and then they give you a check. That's a really, really challenging thing. Creates stress.
Before I was a farmer, I was a cancer researcher. And I think that most, regular everyday people would think that that's like a really, stressful and anxiety producing thing to do. And I mean, I can easily say that it's nothing compared to farming. You have all of the physical labor that you're doing, you're tired, you don't get enough sleep at night, and you have all of that, and you've got a business to run at the same time.
Very stressful.
I'm Jeff Whitty. I serve as Secretary of Agriculture in the state of New Mexico. I represent the agriculture to the governor and the governor to agriculture. Come on, buddy. These folks are really dealing with the stress of feeding the world. And when you hear of cases where they just couldn't take it anymore, you realize we've got to be there to help them.
I'm Roger Marshall. I'm the United States Senator from the great state of Kansas. So I grew up in agriculture, and I just never have seen the amount of stress that I'm seeing today in the world of agriculture. It's the input costs, it's interest rates. We were all brought up in agriculture. We were taught farm safety. And despite the best practices, we still lose a farmer about once a day across the country to some type of a farm-related accident. But we're also losing a farmer most every day to suicide as well. So the stress is real. I'm trying to do what I can do on my side in Washington to make better agriculture policy, but the stress is absolutely real out there, and my heart just goes out for the folks in agriculture right now.
Many farms are multi-generational. That is a tremendous obligation I have to my ancestors. If the farm is beginning to fail for reasons beyond my control, will I be the last generation to farm this land? Will I be the one who has to look at my ancestors and said, I lost this farm? I don't think people realize what an incredible amount of pressure that puts on an individual.
I see it on his face and I see it on my father-in-law's face a lot. You have to make really big decisions really quickly oftentimes. And I don't think they realize it, but you can tell that they're making that decision based off of that pressure to kind of continue that legacy.
Think about the pressure on my farmers. Like, I'm a 5th generation farm kid. Many of these folks today will be 6th generation. So for 6 generations, they've been able to keep this farm going. You know, a farmer doesn't inherit the land from their ancestors. They borrow it from their children. And I think they're just embarrassed that because of unforeseen circumstances, they've not been able to keep the family farm together.
My name is Ellen Stewart. I'm a therapist and a counselor. The number of psychiatrists in rural America is 1/3 of what it is in urban areas. So in Delaware County, that means there's one psychiatrist who's affiliated with the mental health clinic an hour away for 48,000 people. I can't even comprehend that.
With rural America, it can take for some people, 30 minutes to an hour just to go to, a grocery store. Well, it's the same way with our health care and our mental health care. They don't have that access that someone who lives in a more populated area, would be. So that's really a big problem.
Most farmers have to travel 30, 60, 100 miles for any type of care, more than just an urgent care situation. So there simply aren't the resources in rural America that you're going to see in an urban setting.
Stigma is one of the biggest obstacles to seeking mental health care. There is this, independent-minded spirit that really helps a lot of us thrive in these kind of areas when the winters are rough and long, and a lot of people are not open to talking about their mental health issues. They feel embarrassed. They feel like it's just them and other people won't understand.
Rural people are very proud. We've all had cases where we might have broken a bone and we didn't want to tell anybody or even recognize that fact because we might have to slow down and not finish the gather or the shipping or the harvest. That's what we do. We keep it within ourselves and we go on.
There is within rural communities, the stigma is from a sense of, I don't want people to think there's something wrong with me. The same farmer who, if he sees one of his milkers limping, wouldn't think twice to call the vet, will hesitate to speak to someone saying, look, I'm really not feeling good about myself. I'm really struggling with something right now. They won't ask for that help.
I want to see our conversations change. I want to see people be at that point where they can say, I have PTS and I am bipolar and I'm damn proud of it. We tell people that have cancer that we hope like hell that they beat it and that they keep fighting and we're in their corner. What about the people with bipolar and anxiety? Why can't we have those conversations?
Mental health and stress, it needs to be as important in the discussion as how much water we're going to get, the price of seed. It needs to be equal to that discussion. Because when it is, the stigma of dealing with it will no longer exist.
It's just gone unrecognized, untreated for too long. It doesn't have to be this way. There's help out there, and I just think the stress is so immense right now on farmers that they need a word of encouragement, and that's my job. My job is to be out there to be a message of hope. Yeah.
It's okay if everything's not perfect and you might not have everything in, your life together. You don't have to, and you don't have to struggle alone. That's what's so important is, talking about our own stories and sharing what resources we know to get people help.
Everybody has the power to help these issues. Just putting your hand on someone's shoulder who's in need, telling them it's okay to feel this way. We can find you help. You don't have to be in this kind of pain.
We need to talk about it. We need to bring it out of the shadows. The more we talk about it and the more we acknowledge what's going on, the better off we're all going to be. It's okay to feel bad, but don't not talk to somebody.
I can't stress it enough to tell you that you are loved by so many, and no matter what is going on that's causing you to be in that dark place, that there is hope.
If you're out there and you're listening to this and you're struggling, I'm going to tell you right now, you're important. Somebody's life is better because you're here, and you need to continue to be here. It is okay to ask for help. Just keep asking because we want you to stay here.
Don't be afraid to ask, because odds are your family, your friends, whoever else is in the industry, even though we're in our own pockets of small family farms, we're connected at the root. That sounds good.
Whew. There you go. We still have time for our speakers, so we're gonna move into that. And speakers, I'll just give you a heads up when we're gonna switch. So we're gonna start off with Greg Merck, who is the executive director of New York Farmnet, and he was in the film. So kick us off, Greg, just a little bit about your work and what you all have been hearing from farmers.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Caitlin, and good afternoon to everyone. New York Farmnet is an organization that provides both financial and emotional or mental health support to New York farm families across the state. We were established in 1986, and originally, as a result of the farm crisis at the time, financial crisis, we were primarily financially oriented. How do we save these family farms from foreclosure, bankruptcy, loss of their livelihood? And within 2 or 3 years, it became very evident during the debriefing that while we were helping many farmers deal with what we call the transactional aspects of keeping the farm going, the consultants were saying there are other issues at the table, and we're just not capable or competent or trained to deal with it. And it was in that moment that someone said, well, let's throw a counselor out there and let's see what happens. And suddenly the whole dynamic of the situation changed, because now you had a team sitting at the table looking at the situation from a very holistic perspective. And over time, we've come to understand that there is a real intersectionality between the financial viability of an operation, a farm, and the mental health of the family. And that on the other side of it, a mental health crisis can exacerbate or create financial challenges for the operation. So we work together, our consultants work together, they work with a family, and they try to peel apart what are the various pieces. And so while we may be talking about financial challenges on one hand, we're also working with that family to help them understand, how do you deal with it? How do you come to terms with it? Sometimes it's restructuring debt, looking into other enterprises, but there are also many instances where there is no other option but perhaps to sell the farm. And so we don't just say, okay, well, I guess that's what you're going to have to do. Now we have to work with that family to work them through that process. How do you deal with that? How do you handle that? How do you acknowledge it? And while our goal is always to save every family farm, at the end of the day, a farm is a collection of assets, but the family ultimately is most important. So again, we provide this service that is free to all the farmers in New York State, and we're very pleased um, at the work we do. It's interesting in the last number of years, last half dozen years or so, there's been a greater interest from others around the country to go, share your model with us. This makes so much sense. And so we've been talking to people around the country. Here's how we do it. Here's how our model works. Here's what we've learned over 35, 40 years of doing this and what makes it most effective. I think the other thing that's important to understand and what we're starting to hear a lot of is the stressors are everything. A barn burned down. I can't pay my bills. Dad died suddenly without a will or an estate. Um, I'm not hearing any one particular thing, but again, it's all of these stressors, all of them impacting an individual. And all I'll say to kind of wrap this up in it really strikes to the core of what many multi-generational farmers deal with. And I heard this very well expressed a number of years ago, and I think it's still to this day very true, is that for most people, policymakers, people living in urban areas, they go, well, if you're not making a living, just change jobs, sell the farm and change jobs. And the way it was described was farming is more than just a job. It is a legacy and it is my identity. And to just ask someone to give up their identity and to give up their legacy is not something you can do very easily. So again, we strongly encourage all new farmers, existing farmers, if you're struggling, pick up the phone and talk to somebody. There is help available. So thank you, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Greg. And we refer lots of farmers on the hotline to New York FarmNet, and we wish there was a New York FarmNet in every state. All right, Chris, we're going to go next to ChrisPavvelski, who is a farmer in New York and has worked directly with Greg.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Caitlin. Appreciate being here. Yes, my farm has worked with FarmNet on 3 different occasions and 3 different issues, and Greg was our counselor on one of them. And he did an amazing job, actually, along with his co-counselor came. And this was at a point where we were dealing with a transition in the farm. I am a 4th-generation farmer in Orange County, New York, which is about an hour north of New York City. And my wife and I were the subjects of a film very similar to this one that came out last year. It was actually also a documentary short, about 19 minutes long, called Muckville. And if anyone gets a chance to see it, I'd strongly recommend seeing it. If you go on Google, type in Muckville and then Hudsy, Hudsy, you can find the link, and you have to register on Hudsy's site, but it's free and they don't spam you. And it covers a lot of the same things, but it focuses on our family. And just to kind of emphasize and reiterate what Greg said, he's absolutely right. It's not so easy to separate yourself. It's not so easy to end. There's an incredible amount of pressure. In my case, my father had passed. I was 4th gen, and things were struggling, and we had to make a huge change, and it brought about basically suicidal thoughts and planning. Fortunately, we were able to, my wife and I, to work our way past it. But our area has experienced numerous, for a very small farming community, relatively speaking, numerous suicides over the years of farmers and their children. So it is a very large problem. And it's great that FarmNet, the work they do in helping to address it. As a matter of fact, our film came about because a filmmaker had approached FarmNet about doing this topic, and the filmmaker did, Jeff Mertz, and we were recommended to be talked to. And my wife and I have been involved in doing ag public policy work for the last 30-some years on the grassroots level on a number of different issues. And when I was asked first, I couldn't say no. First off, FarmNet did a lot of good to help us immensely on a number of different issues. And secondly, one thing we found when we worked on policy issues over the years, whether it be disaster aid or crop insurance reform or whatever, we found that the most effective way to bring about change or to get people to support, especially on the legislators, but just even the public, is you have to personalize the issue. When you make it you could talk in the abstract about farmers are losing such and such money, blah, blah, blah. But when you say, I've lost $250,000 and I can't pay my bills, it carries a whole different impact to it. And so I was interviewed first, and I had to twist the arm of my wife big time. And she finally agreed. And my wife's actually the star of it. And she does an amazing job. But um, we really hoped in doing it that it would bring attention. And then by that attention, it would lead to obviously more programs, more assistance. And as far as mentioning the FarmNet model, that's one thing I've been talking about for a number of years now, actually. The FarmNet model should be really basically brought out and established in all the land grants. It should be in all 50 states. And again, not just, this as far as like farm transfer issues and so on and so forth. They help, or I should say they help with farm transfer issues. They help with mediating problems within the family to work together. So it's an incredible program that does an incredible service. But we greatly appreciate this film as well. And we appreciate the attention being drawn to this. It's an undercovered issue and topic, and we need more because it's a very stressful occupation, and we're losing our farmers, and we need to do something in order to address it. So appreciate Farm Aid doing this webinar and covering it as well, and greatly appreciate the filmmaker and the people that were in this film. It takes a lot of courage to do it.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for sharing the story. And if you don't mind putting that link to Muckville in the chat, that would be great. All right, I'm going to take us to Friendly Vang Johnson, who works with the Minnesota Farm Advocates, which is another incredible program, working directly with farmers that I also wish we had in every state. So Friendly, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hello, everybody. I'm Friendly, and as Caitlin mentioned, I work as a farm advocate for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. In that role, I help people start, stay, and transition away from farming. I grew up farming myself. I am Hmong, and my parents are among the first Hmong farmers in the United States. My people have been farming for well over 1,000 years. Many archaeological records to indicate that as evidence. So when I grew up farming, I definitely did not want to become a farmer because it is very stressful. As a young person in a household where you're expected to get up and go work in the fields, go to the farmers markets, help to harvest, plant, process vegetables. It was really tiring, and it really solidified for me the intention that I did not have the grit to do this. And so my background is actually in public policy. And before I was an advocate, I spent a couple of decades with the Government Accountability Office as a performance auditor, investigating many different issues. I retired recently and came back to do this work for this issue of local agriculture, small scale, diversified specialty crop farming in particular, because I see it in our community as people who have been displaced and dispossessed of land and who have, encountered genocide almost like every single continent that we've lived on. That farming is for us a way of healing and actually staying mentally sound and having communities, the bonds of community really reinforced. And so I tried to bring that paradigm to the work of understanding our roles as farmers, as land stewards to the folks that I'm working with, so that they understand that it is not, just as we are not permanent, we are not only farmers, right? We are not simply farmers, that is something that we carry on through our lifeblood and something that we pass on. And it may not be to our kin, right? But it is something to pass on to the next generation. And if we can look at things that way, I think it reduces the amount of stress that people feel, the burden that they have to carry on as farmers. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about how I approach the work and the paradigms that I use. Our farm advocacy work obviously is very complex. So we're not only looking at mental health, but we're looking at financials. Ruth Anne, who you'll I hope to also hear from on this call, she and I are working with a farmer right now who's in a lot of distress, who's on the verge of foreclosure. And she's really physically, mentally not in the position to keep her farm. And so our job again is going to be there alongside of her to help her come to that realization and to try to do it in such a way that she isn't caught up in suicidal ideation or despair. I think I'll leave it at that. So there's room for others to speak.
Thanks so much, Friendly. And yeah, let's hear from Ruth Ann. Ruth Ann is also an advocate with the Minnesota Farm Advocates for 40 years.
Darn near. The Advocate Program was launched in 1984 and was actually the first program like this in the entire country, although we knew very well that there were a lot of other states that were looking at it, and we were always proud to be able to be a role model and answer questions and then work with the other states to find out what they were doing to make us better. I signed my first contract in '86 with the intention of keeping that job for 2 years, and here I am. I'm going to die with my boots on. Minnesota Farm Advocate Services are available to farmers, as New York is, across the state of Minnesota. We are stopped by the border. I get into trouble sometimes because I'm very close to the South Dakota border, and I have people who live in South Dakota and farm in Minnesota, and it gets a little complicated. We are there to do the beginning farmers. We're always interested in trying to help beginning farmers, and we all know that's really difficult these days. We work with existing farmers. We work with farmers in mediation. We work with farmers in crisis. Most recently, we've really been working with a lot of breaking partnerships, these old, long-established brother-brother partnerships that never had a partnership agreement, or if they did, they never followed the partnership agreement, and now we have a big mess on our hands. We are not attorneys, we are not accountants, and we're not mental health counselors. But in many, many cases, we become a bit of a mental health counselor because we listen to the stories and we try to find the solutions and cheer people on and talk to them about how do we get from A to B and how did we get here. And because this is mental health, I was just thinking about the first time I lost a farmer. It was one of my first, probably my 5th or 6th training, and we used to train all the time because there was so much to learn and we didn't have the blessing of the internet. We had pencils and papers and great big erasers. And we had a training, and on the last day of our training, it was very long and interesting training on finding the signs of suicide. And it was very good. And we finished that on a Thursday. We came home on Thursday. On Friday, I went to the final mediation of one of my farmers in the adjoining county. Nicest guy you ever met. First guy that would come to your assistance if you had a problem. And the only thing that I noticed that was unusual, we had everything solved. The bank was happy. Everybody else was happy. And he asked one of the lenders, his primary lender, if his credit life insurance was still in place. And I thought, well, that was a strange question, but people have different questions, and I hadn't been an advocate forever. And they assured him it was. And then he asked if he could now go about the neighborhood and pay off whatever open accounts he had on Main Street. And so then they said, absolutely. So when mediation was over, he and his wife and I had a cup of coffee. We had a little lunch. We hugged each other. I went home. He went downtown. He went around to his various creditors on Main Street and repair shops and that sort of thing. He paid them all. He thanked them all for everything they had done for him, for their patience in waiting through the mediation to get paid. And the following morning, his wife called me and he had taken his life during the night. That was really, really one of the hardest situations I've ever been through. I went to his funeral on the Saturday before Easter. That broke my heart. And it taught me a lot. And I went with his wife to, following to work out the arrangements with his various secured lenders. And I also went with her to some of the meetings of people who needed help and needed to be uplifted and had been affected by suicide. And that was really eye-opening. And I honestly don't know if I've ever saved someone's life, because I was just there to answer the phone and chat with them. But I do know that one of the big jobs that we have as Minnesota Farm Advocates, and all of you have, is to be there to listen and just to cheer them on and try so hard to make sure they understand how important they are and how valued they are and how much they mean to the rest of the world. And so I'm very pleased to be able to speak on this. I am very proud to be a Minnesota Farm Advocate. I've never counted the number of farmers I've worked with, but I got to tell you, I've been here long enough. I'm in my third generation. And I'm very proud of that. So
Thank you so much, Ruth Anne. So much experience. I know we only have a couple minutes, which is less time than I was hoping for Q&A. But feel free to ask questions of these folks. You can put them in the chat. And we do have Chris Files here, who is the director of the film. So if you have any questions specifically for him as well, or any of our speakers, we still have 3 more minutes. I will ask a question if if there aren't any, which I don't see any in the chat right now. But Chris Files, I'm just curious to hear how you came to this topic and how long it took for you to pull this project together.
Yeah, we came to the topic because, and thank you, by the way, for the question. Senator Marshall visited our Kansas office to hold a press event about Mental Health Awareness Month a few months back, and challenged us to be, at American Ag Credit and Farm Credit, to be a voice in that space. And we spent the next year and a half making this documentary because that's been my career. I'm in the multimedia field, and we knew that if we wanted to really raise awareness, we needed to tell the stories of those impacted by the crisis. And so that's what we did. And what I learned, my team and I learned making this, is that this is everywhere. It knows no borders, this crisis. And the stigma is such a huge part of what we need to overcome. There are resources out there. There could always be more. But one of the biggest challenges is just the stigma that exists in talking about it in the first place. We don't do so with the same comfort of talking about any other illness. So it's my hope, it's our hope, that you could take the video you just watched, you could take Muckville, you could take Greener Pastures, and just share them. And just by talking about it, we're already doing something about it. And an inspirational piece tends to inspire action. So again, Muckville, Greener Pastures, and then Out of the Shadows. Just please use those resources however you want to inspire action. And then all of our employees at American Ag Credit went through QPR training to just recognize the signs of suicidal ideation. So I'd recommend a similar training to anyone in this field. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I saw the question about trainings. QPR, which is question, persuade, respond. Mental health first aid. Those are 2 that our team has gone through. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has a great training. And there's several others. So feel free to, I put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions also for the other speakers, I can pass them along or connect you with them if they're open to that. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Chris Files, for letting us show this film, and thanks for joining us in the middle of your day today. Thank you all.